Hi Relo Mentoring friends. Today I will tell you the story of my kidnapping. You probably have seen from my website already that I grew up in Bulgaria. And that story happened when I was 16. Why do I want to tell my viewers this story? Because thousands of people disappear in America on a daily basis. Out of them, 60% are juveniles, and about 80 to 85% decide to run away from home. Please don't do that, as you don't want to follow in my footsteps. What happened is I grew up in the capital of Bulgaria, Sofia, but any chance I had, I would head to my grandparents' village on the river of Danube, and I would typically take half-way train and then switch to a bus the other half of the way. On that particular day of the kidnapping, there weren't any buses for many hours in a row, so I was supposed to wait for that many hours, and I know my grandma would be worried. Now, that was at the age when cell phones were not existent yet, and so I decided to go hitchhiking. That was the wrong decision, of course, and I knew I was risking it. However, I decided to try and do it anyway, as I was hoping for a safe outcome. Once I started on the way, there was a car that stopped almost immediately. There were two men inside, and they asked me what direction I was headed. I told them where I was going, and they invited me in the car. They said, "Oh, we're going exactly that way." So I hesitated, but I jumped in, and that, of course, was my mistake, because one of the men who was the driver supposedly went back into the city to drop off his friend. And I said, "When are we heading in the right direction?" knowing that that was not the way towards my grandma's village. He said, "Oh, right now, don't worry about it." But then he invited me to stop at a cafe, which I did. I had no choice at this point. Supposedly, he wanted to see some friends. Then we continued, but then he didn't take the right way either. He took another way through the mountains. It was quite scary because we were both now isolated in the car. At some point he said, "Would you like to drive the car?" And my parents never owned the car, so I said no. He said, "Do you know what's gonna happen if I get mad?" And I just kept quiet. I wanted to get courage somehow inside myself, and that was very difficult at that moment. But I urged myself not to cry, not to panic, as I knew that that's my only outcome out of this situation. And I imagined how that man could do anything he desired with me at that moment, could bury me, kill me and bury me somewhere, and my parents and my grandma wouldn't even know about it. And that was such a sad and scary realization. So basically, I gave my freedom away at that moment to someone else. And I vowed to myself that should I see another village inside, I'm gonna trick the man to stop in another cafe and have another cup of coffee, which I did. Soon enough, there was another village. I tried to convince him to stop. He said, "No, everything's closed today." I said, "No, this one's open." And I was relieved to see some man standing in front of that cafe. I exited, and at that moment, I got my backpack and I said, "I'm up to here." The man said, No, please come back. I had some business here in this village." I wouldn't fall for that anymore. I wasn't that stupid. So I went straight to this man in front of the cafe and told them my story. You know what their reaction was? They looked at each other, they looked at me, and they laughed. They laughed out loud. Either they didn't believe me or they were just not helpful. I said, "Could you at least tell me where's the bus stop so I can return to that major city? From there I can get another bus to my grandma's destination." So they pointed at the bus stop across. As I was trying to wait for the bus at that bus stop, the man who kidnapped me was trying to go around and get me back into the car. So I couldn't just stay still at that train station. There came a man, an elderly man on a bike, and so I told him the story, and he promised to stay with me until he sees me safely on the bus, which he did. And I was surprised went back into that major city and finally getting the bus towards my grandparents' village to see who the driver was. It was the same man who the driver of the car, the man who kidnapped me, dropped off. That was his friend. I was speechless. So that driver of the bus said, "So where did the other guy leave you?" I just didn't talk to him. I didn't answer anything. I was shocked. But finally I made it to my grandparents' village and safely into the embrace of my grandma, who was worried, of course, where was I for so many hours. She was waiting for me. So that taught me a lesson, but of course that experience stays with me for life. And I want to tell you about this experience as to prevent many juveniles and many teenagers from running away from home just because they get mad at their parents. Please don't do that. Please don't take strangers take away your freedom and who you are. Thank you for watching.